Go ahead to the next one. All right, code coverage for public adjusters. This is an in-person and virtual continuing education credit for New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Illinois, New York, and Colorado. To receive the CE credit, you must sign in on the seminar roster and remain in person for a total of 50 minutes to receive the full credit. If you need to excuse yourself, you must sign up with the course moderator and check in with them once you return. The course may only be taken one time for a credit in the renewal period. And state certificates are emailed within 15 days after the event. APPEA members receive complimentary free CEs. Non-members will be charged $15 per CE fee to do that. And you can always contact Janice Gasperi with any questions. And I believe that Pennsylvania, if you are in the room, you still must log on. Go ahead and advance, Sheila. Same sort of thing, and New Jersey, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Illinois, New York, and Florida. To receive the CE credit, you must remain live for the entire virtual classroom session to receive the full credit. You will be required throughout the virtual classroom session to respond to checkpoints popping up in the right side of your video. Be aware full screen viewing might impede your ability to notice the checkpoint. And I found that yesterday, that if you are in full screen, you're not going to see it. So if you're in partial screen, you'll be okay. There are 4 checkpoints throughout the session. If you miss one, no CE credit will be issued to you. And attestation via DocuSign to confirm attendance will be sent after event's completion. Please complete as soon as possible to receive the credit. And again, the course may be only taken one time during the credit renewal period. Go ahead, Sheila. All right, code coverage for public adjusters, Mount Airy Casino Resort, and our convention for 2021. As code coverage is also known as ordinance and law coverage, building code upgrade coverage is an important endorsement that covers the additional cost to repair, damage, or replace a home in the event of a claim. Older homes that are damaged may need upgraded electrical, heating, or plumbing based on city codes. So just before we advance, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about housing and building code overviews. So there's also something called a housing code, and those codes are usually by a city for rental units, which set a minimum standard for housing conditions that all rental housing, new or existing, must meet. There are 2 states that have housing codes, Massachusetts and California. So if you are working in those states, that may come into play if you are doing a claim for a rental unit and you got into the housing codes. The building codes, the IRC, which is what we're going to talk today, what we're going to talk about today, the International Residential Code, is for 1-story, 2-story, and 3-story above grade and row houses. I just want to bring up the IRC here. I had it on this screen, but I'm going to bring it up on another one. So the go ahead and advance. An example of how a building code or upgrade coverage works is, let's say in a windstorm, an old tree falls on your roof and into your living room. In order to repair or replace the damaged structure, the city or state or county requires that the building be updated to meet current codes as a building code condition of rebuilding. You would be required to install costly repairs in order to meet the current building codes. Go ahead and advance. If your current policy doesn't have this valuable endorsement to address this coverage gap, you'll be responsible for the additional cost out of your pocket. You can select building code upgrade limits of 10, 25, or 50% of your coverage A dwelling limit. For example, if the dwelling amount of your home is $200,000, the 10% option will allow up to $20,000 in upgrades due to building codes and requirements. Go ahead and advance. Most policies exclude the coverage for the cost of complying with building laws. Typical exclusion language reads as follows. We do not insure under any coverage for any loss which would not have occurred in the absence of one or more of the following excluded events. We do not insure for such loss regardless of A, the cause of the excluded event, or B, other causes of the loss, or C, whether other causes acted concurrently or in any sequence with the excluded event to produce the loss, or D, whether the event occurs suddenly or gradually, involves isolated or widespread damage, arises from natural or external forces, or occurs as a result of any combination of these. So that's pretty hard to understand. They kind of go all over the place with that. But really what they're saying is if you don't have code coverage, no matter how, why, or when it happened, it's not covered. Ordinance of law, meaning the enforcement of any ordinance of law regulating the construction, repair, or demolition of a building or other structure unless specifically provided for under this policy. So if you don't have the ordinance of law, or as we call it, code coverage, and one of the things that's happening now is many of the insurance companies are saying that if the county, city, or state doesn't enforce it, they don't have to pay for it. So one of the things that comes up is the drip edge on a roof. And many of the jurisdictions don't enforce it. But I'm going to get over to the actual IRC here in just a little bit. And it says that the inspectors, the appointed inspectors, so the building inspectors and the deputy building inspectors in each jurisdiction have to follow the code. And so if the code says that we need drip edge, whether it's enforced or not, it still is required by code. And we're also going to discover that the code says that they can't do anything less than. So if there's modifications to the code by a jurisdiction, it can't be less than what the code provides for now. Go ahead and advance, Sheila. So in any given case, however, code upgrade coverage will greatly depend on the language of the policy. And one of those is if it's enforced. The policy in question and the type of coverage that the policyholder has elected to purchase. As with any other insurance provisions, any ambiguity should be resolved in favor of the insured. Advance. Many courts have interpreted the often contradicting code upgrade exclusion. While case law is certainly conflicting on this issue, many courts have ruled that code upgrade losses are covered despite the exclusionary language, if they are an efficient proximate cause of a covered peril, but not on their own. Advance. The test is not what the building official reasonably believes the code allows him to do, nor is it what a lawyer or judge believes the code allows, but rather the test is what a reasonable lay insurance purchaser would believe the code allows the city to enforce. And for those of you that sat in with Tony DeLilio and Bill Undercuffler yesterday's class on the changes between the old and new HO3, you'll remember that they used the word reasonable numerous times. So what's reasonable? And the code is pretty straightforward on what you can do and who can do it. I'm just looking through here for the part that talks about the administration of it. And for those of you that want to take a look at the code, if you just Google the IRC, it'll probably be the first one that comes up. And really what you want to read is Chapter 1, Scope and Administration, Part 1, Scope and Application. And Part 2, administration and enforcement. And it really just talks about how this is applied. And incidentally, there are 49 states and the District of Columbia that have adopted the IRC. Now, there's also something called the International Building Code. So once you go more than 3 stories in a private home, or you go to apartment complexes or larger structures, it's the building code. But for single family duplexes and row houses up to 3 units, we're in the IRC. Okay, advance. The court reasoned that a reasonable layperson of insurance would conclude that the building official has the authority under the unsafe structures section of the building code to require alterations to existing non-conforming uses that are dangerous to human life. So the code does point out that the building inspector can modify the code. He can make adjustments to the code for certain situations, but for the purposes of safety and human health, it can never be less than the code. So they can change things and do them alternatively, but it cannot be less than code. Go ahead and advance. So this is from Merlin, coverage C, increased cost of construction coverage. So if a covered cause of loss occurs to the covered building property, we will pay for the increased cost to 1, repair or reconstruct the damaged portion of that building property and or reconstruct or remodel undamaged portions of that building property, whether or not demolition is required. When the increased cost is a consequence of enforcement of a building, zoning, or land use ordinance of law. So what that means is so let's say a portion of your house is damaged by a fire. It's an older home, the electrical doesn't meet code, and the insurance company says, well, we're only paying to repair the section of the electrical that was damaged by the fire. Well, let's say it goes right back to the service box and it doesn't meet code. It may be from the 40s or the 50s. So what this is saying is that they would have to tear out all that electrical to meet the new requirements. And in some policies, for example, the new State Farm policy says they are only going to pay for that portion of code coverage or the increased cost of construction for parts of the structure that were actually damaged. So I've got a couple of different claims down here right now, roof claims. One of them is a roof claim, and they want to, the rafters don't meet code. So you can go into, the roof section, Chapter 9 of the IRC, roof assemblies, and it's going to give you the rafter spacing depending on the span that those rafters are carrying the load. It's also going to tell you the thickness of the roof sheathing that you would have to have on that roof. So I've got a roof that the sheathing doesn't meet code, and nor does the rafters. The spacing is too great. So it's a State Farm policy. In the old 7955 policy, it would have been covered, but with the new policy that State Farm just recently brought out, it says that they will only pay for code for the parts of the roof or the parts of the building that were actually damaged. So now we're trying to find if the contractor changed any of the sheathing because it was damaged. And if it was, then I can get the sheathing, but I'm still not going to be able to get the rafters. If it was just basic code coverage, then we would be able to bring the whole roof up to code. I have another claim where it has asbestos siding, and of course we can't have asbestos siding anymore, but that one is with Allstate, and they only want to change out the actual pieces of the asbestos siding that were damaged. So depending on the wording of the policy will determine whether you're going to be able to change out all of a portion of a home, meaning all of the electrical, all of the roof. Maybe it's tie downs for hurricanes, maybe it's the windows. That would be a good argument, you know, if you're in a hurricane or a tornado area and you've got windows that were damaged and now you've got to upgrade all the windows. That would be interesting. All right, go ahead and advance, Sheila. Both parties agree that when a damaged building must be repaired or reconstructed, it is not unusual for building code officials to require that the work be performed consistent with current construction code standards, which may not have existed when the structure was built. Thus, there is no dispute that the clause in question applies to the increased cost of bringing the damaged portion up to the current code standards, kind of what we were just talking about. Go ahead and advance. The parties also agree that the clause would apply to undamaged portions of the same structure, which must be brought up to code in the course of repairing the damaged portion. For example, if a portion of a wall collapses and as a result, code officials require the entire wall to be reconstructed using code compliant materials, there is coverage. Go ahead and advance. The language of the quoted insurance provision is clear. The provision applies to the enforcement of any law or ordinance in effect at the time of the covered loss. The breadth of the provision is not diminished by any limiting language regarding the grandfathered status of code violations. So like I say, in older homes, you don't have to change it to meet current standards. So for example, if you have a home that was built in the 50s, the electrical is still good, the windows are still good. Down here, it wouldn't require tie downs for hurricanes. But if it is damaged, then those code requirements kick in. So as a rep, you're going to want to make sure that your clients have code coverage. And I would also suggest that as reps, you read the first few sections of the code. Right in the introduction, in the preface of the code, it says the International Residential Code, which is the IRC, establishes minimum requirements for 1- and 2-family dwellings and townhouses using perceptive provisions. It is founded on broad-based principles that make possible the use of new materials and new building design. So the codes are upgraded every 3 years. So the code in effect right now is 2018. The next one will be coming out in 2022. I just wanted to read. So the adoption, the International Code Council maintains a copyright in all its code. That wasn't the part I wanted to read to you. So the adoption, as I said earlier, it's going to read that whatever jurisdiction or town it is going to say in their records that they adopt this code. So you'll be able to tell right away. And if you're ever wondering, you can call up a county building inspector, a city building inspector, state building inspector, and say, have you folks adopted the IRC? There is one other code, and it's put out by the fire departments. I'm just trying to find, yeah. So it's called the National Fire Protection Association, the NFPA. So those are only two codes, the ICC or the IRC. The ICC is the International Code Council, which puts out of the all the building codes. And the other one is the National Fire Protection Association. Now, I understand that we do have some people in Chicago. The city of Chicago is the only municipality that continues to use a building code that it developed itself, and it's called the Municipal Code of Chicago. So for those of you that are working in Chicago, they have their own code. Okay. let's go ahead and advance. So it is not necessary that, where a peril specifically where a peril specifically insured against sets other causes in motion, which in an unbroken sequence and connection between the act and final loss produce the result for which recovery is sought, the insured peril is regarded as the proximate cause of the entire life, or sorry, of the entire loss. Okay, so again, it's just how the code section of your policy is interpreted. Go ahead. It is not necessary that the last act in a chain of events, which is therefore regarded as the proximate cause, but the efficient or predominant cause which sets into motion the chain of events producing a loss, such as a fire. An incidental peril outside the policy contributing to the risk insured against will not defeat recovery. In other words, it has been held that recovery may be allowed where the insured risk was the last step in the chain of causation set in motion by an uninsured peril, or where the insured risk itself set into operation a chain of causation in which the last step may have been an accepted risk, expected risk. So again, it's a little confusing. They're just talking about what caused the damage to the part of the loss that you are trying to get code coverage for. Again, if in the more liberal policies, and there's very few of those for those of you that were in Bill's class yesterday, what does a reasonable person expect code coverage to cover, as we talked about 4 or 5 slides ago from Merlin Law? And was a portion of it damaged by whatever the peril was? Broken windows during a break-in or during a wind event, bringing roofs up to code, tie downs, electrical, all of those things. So once something is triggered, then we can get into the code issues. Go ahead and advance, Sheila. New energy management codes are currently being widely adopted. One such energy management code is ASHARE 90.1. It's an energy standard for buildings, except low-rise residential buildings. This code requires that up to 50% of all 125 volt and 15 and 20 amp receptacles be automatically controlled, which means that they will turn themselves off or dim themselves after a certain amount of time. And I guess they're a smart receptacle, and you can set the timers on those for whatever length of time you want. And obviously it's to conserve energy. Go ahead and advance. Here's an interesting one, 406.5, and I just noticed this this weekend when I was up just south of Myrtle Beach. Receptacles in seating areas and other similar surfaces. So these receptacles can't lay flat on the top surface anymore. For those of you that have traveled significantly, you'll notice, or would have noticed in airports, that a lot of times in the seating area, the receptacles were beside you and pointed up. They can't do that anymore. Receptacles are presently not permitted, according to 406.5E, to be installed in a face-up position in countertops or similar work surfaces. In recent times, benches and seating areas in public locations such as airports are being installed with receptacles installed in and on the seating areas. They are typically installed so that someone can sit on these benches and use the supplied 120 volt receptacle outlet for a laptop computer or to charge a cell phone or other electronic handheld device. So basically the top of the outlet cannot point up. It's got to point 90 degrees to the floor so that you can't spill a drink in it and short it out, or have a child stick their finger in it, or anything else. Go ahead and advance, Sheila. 210.52G dwelling unit garage receptacles. A receptacle is now required for each car space in a garage. And I know years ago that most garages really didn't have enough receptacles. Garages used to be a place to park a car, and that was it. Now, of course, with electric cars, we need outlets for that. But so many people are using their garages for shops, sewing places, quilting places, work from home areas. So most garages today have a simple place to work, to park vehicles out of elements. But now they're converted to do a lot of other things. Go ahead. Another good example of code is insulated vinyl siding. It's been about 10% pricier than ordinary vinyl siding, and some homeowners just opt out not to purchase it despite its smoother look. Now, homeowners may reconsider due to the change. This one's for Pennsylvania Building Code. The new rule allows multiple paths to meet the home's total R value, and that's its insulation value. It will now be acceptable to use insulated vinyl siding in many cases in lieu of traditional siding and foam board. So that's something else that comes into code coverage is the insulation, not only in the vinyl siding, but also in the walls and also in the attic. I think most codes now are R30 in the attic. And if you're in older homes, it probably won't have that. And of course, from many years ago, believe it or not, people used paper to insulate their walls back in the 20s and the 30s. You would think that most of those homes have been upgraded now, and a lot of them blew in cellulite in the walls. But of course, what happens there is after years, it all drops to the bottom. So the top portion of your exterior wall is no longer insulated, and the bottom portion is.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I'm dealing with a house in Colorado, and we did, it was damaged by hail. And so the roof was damaged, the siding, there was some siding damage and windows damaged. So my adjuster, Jeff Olin, was able to get coverage for building code upgrade for the roof, which had, I think it was almost identical with the situation that you've been dealing with. You know, the sheaths, the rafters had to be upgraded. Mm-hmm. And so, but now we're dealing with a situation where the vinyl siding was put in over stucco, and we don't have a nailable surface to replace the siding. So I think that's another building code building code coverage situation, building code upgrade coverage.
Well, it really isn't, because it's no different that, well, it is, yeah, because you have to have a nailable surface. I've not read the code to see if it says that for wall coverings. If you want to look it up, Chapter 7 of the IRC is wall coverings. I'm just not sure if that's, I guess there's an external exterior portion to that. And let me just see if.
And I'm not sure about the windows either, but the thing is, my question is, if they have building code upgrade coverage, like say they have 20,000, is that 20,000 limited to all the different types of building code upgrade coverage that they might have to deal with?
Yes, that's correct.
So in other words, if say 10,000 was given for the roof, they would have 10,000 left to deal with, say, the siding or windows.
That's correct.
Okay.
So the section of the code that you can look for, and the web address is codes, plural, .iccsafe.org. And then you can get into the IRC, which is the International Residential Code for 2018. It's Chapter 7, and there's an interior and an exterior section
Could you repeat that? Could you repeat that website, please?
Sure. Codes, CODES .iccsafe.org. And from there, you can get into the IRC. It's actually /content/IRC 2018. And you're going to want section R703, which is exterior wall coverings. But the other part with that is that you know, they do have to provide a nailable surface. It's no different than a wall, no different than a roof or a wall. So I would say that that it would be, you probably can get that without doing the code coverage for the nailable surface.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? Okay, so typical municipalities will look like the 2009 International Code. As I said, the newest one is the 2018, and there should be one coming out later this year. As I said, they're updated every 3 years. It probably won't come out till 2022, but it will be called the 2021 IRC. As I mentioned earlier, for multiple, just go back for a second, Sheila. There are multiple codes. So the IBC, the International Building Code, is for larger structures, private homes of greater than 3 stories above grade. Obviously, the electrical code, the mechanical code for heating and air, plumbing, the fire code, and then if you're using any gas, propane, natural gas, there is a code for that, and property maintenance code. And I also mentioned at the beginning that there is also a housing code, which deals exclusively with the conditions for rental properties. So if you are doing a claim for a rental property, it might be worthwhile to take a look at the housing code. And as I said, most of those are going to be municipal. The 2 exemptions are the state of Massachusetts and the state of California. They have state codes for rental housing, and their requirements may be a little different. And I'm sure that now with the new codes for the electrical outlets, that if you have any electrical damage in your loss, that the housing code as well as the IRC would be involved in that. Go ahead and advance, Sheila. All right, so here's some things to think about as a rep. Roofing, we've discussed that. Sheeting for the roof, for your floors, windows, we've talked about that. If you're in a high wind area, tornado area, or a hurricane area, there are certain requirements for your windows depending on how far you are from the ocean. Grading may come into play if, say, you had a tree come up and damage a driveway or a sidewalk. There might be some grading issues there. Obviously, electrical and drywall. One of the drywall issues is the thickness of the drywall in garage ceilings and in the ceilings in your home. North Carolina, for example, has a 5/8 inch drywall code for the ceilings. South Carolina doesn't, but I can usually get 5/8 drywall for the ceilings without question. There are some adjusters that will fight me and want to only put up 1/2 inch. And of course, if they do that, then I ask for glued, because if you put 1/2 inch drywall on the ceiling, it's going to start to sag pretty quickly. So instead of paying the extra for gluing the drywall up, they'll pay for the 5/8. Go ahead and advance. I guess that's the end of it. Are there any other questions?
That's it.
I'm just going to try and take a look back through the questions here, chat, and see if anybody has any questions. So I just wanted to give you a little something to think about. So again, the Housing and Building Codes Overview, if you Google that, it's going to give you all the information about the housing code, which is for rental properties. I've given you the internet address for the IRC, the International Residential Code, which is what most of you are going to deal with. And I think it's very important that every policyholder have code coverage, because if they don't and they have a kitchen fire, a house fire, a tree fall on their roof, they can be out of pocket for a significant amount of money. I've had fire claims where code coverage is $40,000 and $50,000. I would recommend that they get the maximum amount of code coverage that their carrier would allow them to get. And the other thing that you also want to do is become very informed about the different languages that the different carriers have for code coverage in their policy. So are they going to cover the undamaged portion or just the damaged portion? State Farm's changed their policies in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia from the 7955. 7955 was a great policy. The new one, I forget the name on it, is not so good. So they are only covering code for that portion which was damaged. The other thing you want to remember is that the IRC is a minimum standard. The only way that they can change that is to increase coverage. You can't make things less than the IRC. And again, whether a county, a municipality, or a state chooses not to enforce a certain part of the code, it still is code, and the insurance company is still responsible for it, because when you go to sell your home and they say, well, this doesn't meet code, and you go, well, the county didn't make us do it, you're still responsible for it. You still have to have your home meet the IRC standards, whether the jurisdiction enforces it or not. I think that's about it. Everybody, go ahead.
Okay, so thanks so much. I'm learning a lot. So you just mentioned that sometimes the code will only say about the damage versus fixing the undamaged. But let's say that then the policy says that, and they have damage and they fix, the insurance covers the damaged part. But like you just said, will they pass inspection if the undamaged isn't brought up to code? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, or if they tried to sell it now, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, and that's something that you're going to have to talk to the local code enforcement about. Okay. For example, with a roof, if you've got to go in and change to the sheathing, do you then have to change out the rafters if they don't meet code? The state of Florida's got a good law that if you are 60% damaged, then everything's got to be fixed. South Carolina is not like that. North Carolina is not like that. So whatever state you're in, you might want to just check the local requirements to see if there is a percentage of damage that then they have to go and fix all of it.
Okay.
One of the arguments that we use as adjusters is that a roof is a system, just like we talked about the siding. So the exterior protection of your home is a system. It's the sheathing, it's the insulation, it's that final piece on the outside that protects it from the weather. Those are systems. Sometimes we can argue that, sometimes we can't, but the bottom line is the wording of the policy. So as adjusters, we've been trained by Bill, and Bill's very good at this, to take the words of the policy and use it against the insurance company. One of those words is reasonable. So is it reasonable to go ahead and change everything on a roof except the rafters? Right. That's the argument. We don't always win it, but that's the argument. Any other questions?
I was one more thing. I was confused when you mentioned about the housing code. So it's not just required in California and Massachusetts. You were like, I got confused with that. We should still look that up for anybody who's got any landlord, right?
Yes, and if you Google it, I don't have a web address for that, but it's called the Housing and Building Codes Overview. Okay. So, I mean, every city is going to have a housing code. for rental properties. I shouldn't say that. I mean, if it's some little town with no red light, it might not. But any of the larger cities, you would certainly have a housing code for rental units.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
again, everybody needs to read the first few sections of the IRC. You want to read the preface, the effective use of the International Residential Code, and then chapter 1, which is scope and administration. That shouldn't take you much more than 10 minutes. If you want to go in and look at the various chapters to see what's in there for certain things, just to make yourself aware. Bottom line, all your clients need to have code coverage and increased cost of construction coverage. Any other questions? All right, well, we did finish just a few minutes early. Hopefully you all got the little check-in things in your right-hand corner. I didn't see them because I was on full screen, but hopefully you all got those and you signed in. If there's no other questions, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the convention.
Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, can you repeat the website address for IRC?
Sure, it's codes, CODES .ICCSAFE, codes plural, .ICCsafe.org, O-R-G. And if you want to go right to it, /content/IRC 2018.
Sheila put it in the
I did
chat.
with the web.
It's also in the chat. Great job, Brian. Thanks, man.
All right, thank you all. Enjoy the convention, and hopefully everybody will take part in the Ice Bucket Challenge. I uploaded my video this morning, so y'all can go and watch that. It's kind of funny, but enjoy the convention. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.